Moving into my new house was supposed to be the start of something great. A quiet suburban neighborhood, neatly trimmed lawns, well-maintained sidewalks, and the kind of place where people waved at each other just to be polite. It was exactly what I wanted, a peaceful, drama-free place to call home. But that dream, it lasted exactly 24 hours. Because that's when I met Karen. You know the type. The self-appointed ruler of the homeowners association, the neighborhood dictator, the kind of person who probably has a spreadsheet of approved grass lengths and wakes up every morning thrilled to ruin someone's day. The moment I pulled up to my new driveway, I noticed her watching, arms crossed, standing on her porch like a sentinel guarding her territory. Her short, over-processed blonde bob gleamed in the sunlight. She was wearing that expression, a mix of suspicion, judgment, and just a touch of excitement. Because Karen lived for one thing only: a power. And unfortunately for me, I was her next target. I barely had time to unlock my front door before I heard her voice, sharp and full of Karen energy. "Excuse me. Excuse me." I turned around, already sensing trouble. She was marching toward me like a suburban Terminator, clipboard in one hand, disapproval in the other. "Are you moving in?" she demanded. I blinked, looked at the moving truck, looked back at her. Yeah?" She narrowed her eyes. I wasn't informed that a new homeowner was moving in. I almost laughed. "I wasn't aware I had to run it by you first." She gasped. "Oh, you do. All new residents need to be approved by the HOA board. You did get board approval, didn't you? Now here's the thing. I did buy this house legally. I did follow every process correctly. But something told me Karen wasn't looking for facts. Something told me Karen was looking for a fight. I decided to play along." "Huh. You know, I don't think the owner needed to check in with you before selling." Her face twisted into the smuggest smirk I had ever seen. "Oh, but they do. And if they didn't, then I'm afraid we'll have to look into eviction proceedings." Eviction. She was threatening to kick me out of my own home on day one. That's when I knew Karen was just getting started. The next morning, I woke up to my first taste of HOA insanity. A violation notice taped to my front door. I yanked it off and skimmed the page, already expecting some ridiculous nonsense. And sure enough, there it was, in the most Karen-like fashion possible. "Dear resident, it has come to our attention that your property violates multiple community standards. Please address the following issues immediately. Unapproved porch furniture, trash cans visible from the street, unkempt front yard." I looked around. My porch had one chair, a perfectly normal modern chair, not a pile of junk, not an eyesore, just a chair. My trash cans, tucked neatly against the side of my house, like literally everyone else's. My lawn? I had moved in yesterday. The grass was fine. I glanced across the street, and there she was, Karen, arms crossed, smug as hell. I sighed, waving. "Morning, neighbor." She didn't wave back. Instead, she marched over, finger already pointed. "You need to remove that chair," she snapped. I blinked. "What?" "That chair," she repeated. "It's not approved." I looked at the chair, then at her. "Karen, it's literally just a chair." She sniffed. "It ruins the neighborhood aesthetic." At this point, I had two choices. Argue with a fully activated Karen. Accept that this woman was going to be a problem and prepare for war. I picked option 2. I grinned. Well, lucky for me, I own this house, so I'll be keeping my chair. Her face twitched. "We'll see about that," she muttered, stomping away. I didn't know it yet, but she was already plotting. A few days later, I was on my porch, enjoying a rare moment of peace. when I saw something that made me choke on my coffee. A group of Secret Service agents was walking down my street. Now I've worked at the White House long enough to know what that means. And sure enough, there he was. Donald J. Trump, walking through my neighborhood. I rubbed my eyes. I had to be hallucinating. There was no way the former President of the United States was casually strolling down my sidewalk like he was about to go door to door selling steak. But no, it was real. And the moment Karen spotted him, she lost her damn mind. Her jaw dropped. Her hands flew to her chest like she had just been graced by the Holy Spirit of suburban superiority. Then she did something that will forever be burned into my memory. She ran. Not walked. Ran. Straight at Donald Trump. "Mr. President, Mr. President," she screamed, pushing past the agents like she had clearance. The Secret Service moved, but Trump held up a hand, signaling them to stand down. He looked amused. "That's me," he said, giving her the classic Trump smirk. "What's going on, sweetheart?" I nearly spit out my coffee. Karen, already vibrating with excitement, launched into a full-blown rant. "Mr. President, I have a very serious community issue to bring to your attention," she gasped, clutching her chest. "There's a homeowner here, a new one, who is completely destroying the neighborhood with violations." Trump raised an eyebrow. "Violations?" She nodded furiously. "Yes, he's breaking all the rules. His furniture is unapproved. His trash cans are visible. His yard is unkempt." I was dying. Donald Trump, former leader of the free world, was standing in my neighborhood, listening to Karen cry about my trash cans. Trump nodded seriously. "That's terrible. We hate violations. The worst. Some of the worst violations I've ever seen. Huge problem." Then he asked, "Who's the guy?" Karen whipped around, threw out her arm, and pointed directly at me. "Him!" Trump followed her finger. His eyes landed on me, and that's when it happened. His face changed. Recognition flashed in his eyes. He knew me. I saw the gears turn. Then, with all the confidence in the world, he pointed back at me. "Wait a second. I know you." Karen's entire soul left her body. Trump's words hit like a nuke. Karen blinked rapidly, her mouth opening and closing like a malfunctioning puppet. She looked at me, then back at Trump, then back at me, her brain clearly struggling to process what was happening. You know him," she stammered, her voice suddenly a lot less confident. Trump squinted at me for a second, tilting his head like he was trying to place me in his memory. Then, like a light bulb flicking on, he pointed. Yeah, I've seen you before. You work at the White House, don't you?" Karen made a noise that I can only describe as a dying tea kettle. I smiled, casually shoving my hands into my pockets. "That's right, sir." Trump grinned, nodding to himself like he had just confirmed a top-secret briefing. "See, I knew it. Great guy. I've seen him around. Very smart, very capable. Knows what he's doing. One of the best." Karen's soul left her body. I could see it in real time. Her entire strategy, her ultimate power play, was imploding. She had gone from HOA overlord to someone who just tried to evict a White House staffer in front of the former President of the United States. Her mouth flapped open again, but no words came out. Just pure, unfiltered Karen confusion. But, she stuttered. "But, Mr. President, he has violations. He's breaking all the rules." Trump, who up until now had been humoring her, suddenly lost interest. He waved a dismissive hand. Nah, sounds fake. The chair? Great chair. Probably the best chair. People love the chair. The trash cans? Not a problem. Everybody's got trash cans. I've seen worse trash cans. Way worse. His? Totally fine." Karen let out a strangled squeak, Her entire face was turning red. She looked around frantically, as if someone was going to jump in and save her. No one did. Trump kept going. "You know, Karen, I gotta tell you seem very concerned with the wrong things." He patted my shoulder. "This guy? Great guy. We like him. But you?" He tilted his head, giving her a look. "Maybe calm down." Karen froze. She froze solid. For the first time in her life, someone had out-Karened her. And it was Donald J. Trump. I swear, for a moment, I thought she was going to faint. Her entire suburban empire had just collapsed in real time. Her HOA throne, shattered. Her self-proclaimed authority, gone. Her plan to get me kicked out, a historic failure. I could tell she wanted to fight back. That Karen instinct was still in there, screaming at her to argue, to push, to double down. But she couldn't. Because how do you argue with Trump? The man could literally talk forever. She wouldn't stand a chance. I saw it in her eyes, the exact moment she realized she had lost. So, in true Karen fashion, she did the only thing left in her arsenal. She switched tactics. "Oh, Mr. President, She suddenly smiled, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I didn't realize he was one of yours. I was just trying to keep the community beautiful, you know. We all want a nice neighborhood, right?" Trump gave her the classic "I see through your nonsense" look. Yeah, he said, waving her off. "Listen, sweetheart, you gotta relax, okay? You're getting too worked up." That was it. Karen.exe had officially crashed. She just stood there, speechless, watching Trump and his security team walk away. And the best part? As he left, Trump casually looked over his shoulder and threw in one last line. "Great neighborhood, by the way, but some people gotta lighten up." And then? He was gone. Karen. She was still standing there, frozen. The silence after that was unreal. Karen just stood in the middle of the street, her entire worldview shattered. I was just about to go inside when I heard footsteps. Mark, my neighbor, walked over, grinning like an idiot. "Dude," he whispered, shaking his head. "What just happened?" I smirked. "I think I just got presidential immunity from HOA violations." Mark burst out laughing. "Oh my God, Karen's never gonna recover from this." And he was right, because over the next few days, Karen went silent. No more violation notices, no more angry rants, no more power trips. It was as if she had been reset. I could still see her, peeking from behind her blinds, trying to process the fact that she had just gotten shut down by Trump himself. And honestly, I thought that was the end of it. I thought I had won. But I underestimated Karen. Because while she stopped talking to me directly, she was still plotting. And I had no idea what was coming next. For a few days, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Karen had vanished like a ghost. No more violation notices. No more aggressive HOA meetings. No more suspiciously long glares from across the street. At first, I thought I had won. After all, she had just been publicly humiliated by a former president. Her attempt to use her Karen powers to get me evicted had been obliterated in real time. But something felt off. Karen wasn't the type to just give up. I kept catching glimpses of her, peeking out from behind her curtains, watching from her car as she casually drove past my house way too many times in a day. She wasn't done. She was recalibrating. Mark, my neighbor, noticed too. One afternoon, he walked over, sipping his coffee with a grin. "Dude, you really broke her," he chuckled, nodding toward her house. "She's planning something," I muttered, watching her blinds twitch. Mark smirked. "Yeah, probably. You might want to check if she's building a secret bunker to plot your downfall." We laughed, but deep down I knew he wasn't far off. Karen wasn't admitting defeat. She was just preparing her next move. And then it happened. A letter arrived in my mailbox. I expected another BS violation notice. I was wrong. This wasn't just a violation. This was an eviction notice. I actually laughed when I read it. She really thought she could evict me. Again. Mark walked up just as I was holding the paper in my hands. "No way," he said, snatching it from me. "She actually did it." "Oh, she did it," I said, shaking my head. "She went nuclear." Mark read the letter, his jaw dropping. "Dude," he muttered. "She doesn't even have the power to evict you." "Exactly," I said, grinning. "And she's about to find that out the hard way." I immediately called my lawyer, who took one look at the letter and started laughing. "This is completely illegal," he said. "The HOA can't evict you. They don't own the property. They can fine you, harass you, annoy the hell out of you, but they can't just kick you out." "Oh, I know," I said, already planning my counterattack. But then my lawyer said something that made this even funnier. "She didn't even go through the proper channels," he said. "It looks like she just convinced a couple of board members to sign off on this." That's when it hit me. Karen had faked an eviction order. She had gotten a handful of HOA members to back her up, thrown some official-sounding nonsense on a letterhead, and hoped I'd be dumb enough to fall for it. Instead of reacting, I waited. I wanted Karen to think she had won. And sure enough, the next morning, she was glowing. I watched from my window as she waltzed around the neighborhood, smiling, waving to neighbors, looking like she had just personally saved the community from an unspeakable menace. She was so sure she had won. And that's when I decided it was time to let her know exactly who she was messing with. I called an emergency HOA meeting, not as a resident under attack, but as a property owner with power. By the time I arrived at the HOA office, Karen was already seated, looking smug beyond belief. She barely contained her glee as she leaned forward. "I'm surprised you even showed up," she said. "We assumed you'd be packing by now." I grinned, setting a stack of legal documents on the table. "Actually, Karen," I said, "I came to discuss something important." Her smirk faltered just a little. "The future of this community." Karen scoffed. "There's nothing to discuss. The board already made their decision. You have 30 days to vacate." I chuckled. "Yeah, about that." I slid the top document across the table. Karen hesitated before snatching it up, scanning the page. Then she froze. "You see, Karen," I said, casually leaning back, "you don't actually have the authority to evict me." Her eyes darted across the table, searching for backup. The other board members just shifted uncomfortably. I continued. "In fact, this entire eviction notice." I tapped the page. "It's fraudulent. You didn't file it properly, it wasn't legally reviewed, and you bypassed the actual process." Karen's face was turning red. "This," she stammered. "This is nonsense." "Oh, it gets better." I slid another document across the table. "This is from my lawyer. Consider it a formal cease and desist. If you don't retract your fake eviction, you're looking at a lawsuit." Silence. Complete. Utter. Silence. Karen looked like she was about to explode. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. You can't just..." I grinned. "Oh, and one more thing," I said, pulling out one final document. Karen's breathing stopped. I wasn't planning on mentioning this, but since she tried to remove me from my own home, I figured it was time to clear something up. I placed the document on the table and smiled. "You do know that I own multiple properties in this neighborhood, right?" Karen's face drained of color. "You what?" she whispered. I nodded. "That's right. I own 10 houses in this neighborhood." The other board members gasped. Mark, sitting in the back, actually whistled. That means, I continued, I have a say in what happens here. In fact, according to the bylaws, because I own more than 10% of the properties in this community. I leaned forward, dropping my voice just enough to sound dangerously calm. I have voting power that surpasses even yours. Karen looked like she was about to throw up. Greg, the HOA vice president, cleared his throat. Karen, is this true? I smiled, pulling out one final document. Actually, Greg, I said, I'd like to make a motion. Karen flinched. Effective immediately, I continued, I'd like to propose a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. Karen's eyes went wide. You can't, she shrieked. Greg sighed, rubbing his temples. Actually, he said, he can. The vote was held right then and there. Karen, removed. And as she sat there, shaking with rage, I leaned in one last time and whispered, maybe find another neighborhood. Karen had officially lost. Her reign as HOA dictator was over. Her fake eviction scheme had blown up in her face, and her attempt to ruin my life had only backfired spectacularly. But she wasn't done yet. Not completely. As I walked out of that meeting, Karen sat there, her entire body rigid, her face twitching like she was about to detonate. The room was silent. Everyone was either too shocked to speak or too entertained to bother trying. That's when I heard it. Low, venomous. I'll find another way, she muttered under her breath. I paused for a second, then turned back toward her. Excuse me? She snapped up her head, her fake composure barely holding together. Oh, nothing, she said, her voice suddenly dripping with forced politeness. I just meant, I'm sure the new HOA will want to take a closer look at all properties, including yours. The threat was clear. She couldn't officially abuse her HOA powers anymore, but that didn't mean she was going to stop trying to make my life miserable. I smirked. You do that, Karen. And then I walked out. The next few days were uneasy. Karen wasn't talking to anyone. She wasn't handing out HOA violations anymore. She wasn't patrolling the neighborhood like some kind of suburban Batman. She wasn't even pretending to be friendly. Instead, she had gone completely silent, which honestly was more terrifying than when she was screaming at me about trash cans. Mark noticed it too. Dude, he said, sipping his coffee as we watched Karen's blinds twitch for the third time that morning. I don't like this. She's planning something. Yeah, I muttered. She's too quiet. I had this nagging feeling she wasn't done yet. And I was right, because a few days later, I got a mysterious phone call. It was from a local news station. Hi, we're looking to speak with the homeowner at my address. We've received a tip about some ongoing neighborhood disputes and would love to get your side of the story. I had to hold back laughter. A tip? Oh, I wonder who could have possibly done that. I played dumb. Oh, wow. A tip, huh? And what exactly did they say? The reporter cleared their throat. Well, we were told you were causing disturbances in your community, violating multiple HOA regulations, and were recently removed from your property. I burst out laughing. Removed? From my property? There was a pause. So that's not true? Not even a little, I said, still chuckling. In fact, the person who likely sent you that tip is the one who actually got removed from her position in the HOA. The reporter was silent for a second. Then they sighed. Yeah, we kind of figured something wasn't adding up. This isn't the first time we've gotten Karen-style complaints. I smirked. You don't say. I gave them a very short summary of what had actually happened. The reporter was clearly amused. Well, thanks for clearing that up, they said. Honestly, this might be too ridiculous to run. I chuckled. I'd say so. And just like that, Karen's attempt at a media smear campaign had failed. By this point, it was clear she was desperate. She had tried. HOA violations. Didn't work. Fake eviction. Got her fired. Local news smear campaign. Backfired. And then, one morning, I woke up and saw something beautiful. A for sale sign. In Karen's front yard. It took me a second to process. I actually had to rub my eyes to make sure I wasn't dreaming. Mark showed up 2 minutes later, already grinning. Dude, please tell me you see this too. Oh, I see it, I said, laughing. Karen's finally tapping out. For the next week, she avoided everyone. No one knew if she was forced to leave, or if she had just decided to start fresh somewhere else. Personally, I like to think she realized she had lost so spectacularly that she just couldn't show her face in the neighborhood anymore. Mark sent me a photo of the for sale sign later that day, with one word: victory. I laughed, sipping my coffee. The neighborhood was finally free.